Hello, I'm Carol Dowling and I'm a lecturer here at the Centre for Aboriginal Studies at Curtin University. I'm here to talk to you about international Indigenous rights, mainly because my background is Aboriginal. I'm actually a Budima Yamaji woman and my family are from the central west of Western Australia. I'm also a postgraduate coordinator here, so I help Aboriginal people go on to higher degrees. Today, international Indigenous rights. So I thought I'd go into a few things to give you a broad overview to start with. In this session, we're going to be looking at human rights and Indigenous rights. I'm going to look at individual universal human rights, collective group rights, and international developments in Indigenous rights. Here's a little date for you to think about, the 9th of August. That's the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. Have a look at some of the activities regarding that. You might be surprised, you'll see some really amazing things happening. Human rights and Indigenous rights. Universal rights are derived from the understanding that a person is entitled to the same rights and treatment irrespective of his or her race, class, caste and gender. Human rights are both aspirational and pragmatic measures that connect human beings to each other, that go towards describing responsibilities human beings have to each other and seek in order to develop and maintain a community of peace. I like that idea, peace. So individual universal human rights is central to the debate between individual and Indigenous rights and our understandings of rights. Human rights are usually referred to as being universal, whereby all humans have human rights by virtue of being human. Indivisible, we cannot pick and choose between human rights. Interdependent, different types of rights are interdependent on each other. And inalienable, no one can take away anyone else's rights. Bear that in mind. There's also collective group rights. Now, collective group rights, in contrast to traditional understandings of rights, which are individual in nature. They're developed from what Taylor, 1994, calls the politics of recognition. This is where the modern individual identity, that everyone should be recognised for their identity, takes part. But there's also the right to self-determination of peoples and special rights of ethnic and religious minorities. We're talking about existing discourses that emphasised individual needs and entitlements inadequately compared to collective nature of groups with non-Western viewpoints or worldviews. Collective human rights are afforded to human beings communally, that is to say, in conjunction with one another or as a group, a people or a minority. It's about seeking to preserve the integrity of a particular cultural, ethnic and Indigenous group through the right of self-determination. There's a tension with individual rights. Collective rights are not universal. There's a tension between equal rights with everyone, which is complete equality, treating everyone the same, versus recognition of difference or special rights. Let's look at international developments regarding Indigenous rights. International campaigns on the rights of Indigenous peoples through frameworks of collective or group rights started really around about the 1960s and onwards. The UN Working Group on Indigenous Populations was formed around about 1982 and it comprised mainly of Indigenous delegations, and some of the first delegates were from Australia. By 2007, some 20 years later, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, known as UNDRIP, was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. It was a very significant day. Megan Davis, who's an Indigenous Australian author, wrote in 2013 that the core struggle of self-determination lies within the host states. There are competing claims of states versus Indigenous groups. regarding the UNDRIP, the Declaration. Indigenous rights. Many successful liberal democracies around the world that succeed in delivering far better outcomes for Indigenous people in health and well-being, employment and education show that economic development is inextricably linked to self-determination. Self-determination for Indigenous peoples is about freedom. The right to self-determination is contained in the UNDRIP, creating a stumbling block to endorsement for some nation states. They viewed it as separatist and divisive, whereby Indigenous people sought freedom outside of and within a national political and social system. Here are the countries who had difficulty with that ratification of the Declaration. Australia, New Zealand, Canada and the US were the last to endorse the Declaration for this reason. Next part, we'll be talking a bit more specifically about Australia and what actually happens here for Indigenous Australians throughout this country. Please stay tuned.